The mountains had no mercy. They never did. Not for the men who fought in their shadows, not for the animals that scratched survival from their rocky faces, and certainly not for 6 United States Army Rangers who had just watched their extraction window close like a fist. Staff Sergeant Cal Merritt pressed his back against a boulder that had probably sat in that ravine since before America existed. Dust rained down on his helmet with every impact. Taliban fire came from 2 directions: the ridge to the north and the ruins of an abandoned compound to the east. 7, maybe 8 fighters. The math was simple and brutal. 6 Rangers. No air support for at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 years. Merritt keyed his radio. Static. He tried again. Nothing but the sound of incoming rounds and his own heartbeat. He looked at his men. 5 faces. All of them professionals. All of them doing the same quiet calculation he was doing. They had water for 2 days and ammunition for maybe 4 more minutes of sustained contact. The rocky walls of the ravine that had given them cover were beginning to feel like the walls of a grave. Private Donovan was down on one knee, returning fire in controlled bursts. Sergeant Haskins had his back to Merritt, watching the eastern angle. Nobody was panicking. That was the thing about Rangers. They didn't panic. They just got very, very quiet when the situation turned fatal. Merritt checked the ridge to the north one more time. 3 Taliban fighters moved along the ridgeline with confidence. They had the high ground. They knew it. The way they moved said everything. Unhurried, deliberate, positioning themselves for a final angle that would eliminate the last piece of cover the Rangers had left. Once those 3 reached that far spur of rock, the fight would be over in under a minute. Merritt raised his rifle. 800 meters. Variable crosswind coming down the canyon. Elevation differential of roughly 200 feet. Even with a perfect shot, he would likely miss. He never got the chance to find out. The first Taliban fighter dropped. No warning, no sound that registered above the noise of the firefight. The man simply stopped existing. One moment upright and moving, the next a collapsed shape on the rocks. Merritt blinked. The second fighter dropped before the first one had finished falling. Then the third. 6 seconds, 6 shots, 6 bodies on that ridgeline. The fire from the eastern compound faltered. The remaining fighters had no idea what had just happened. The Rangers seized the moment the way Rangers are trained to seize moments. Immediately and without hesitation. They moved. Bound and cover, pushing hard toward the extraction point that had seemed unreachable 30 seconds ago. Merritt ran. He did not look back at the ridgeline. He did not look back because some part of him understood, in the way that soldiers sometimes understand things without being able to explain them, that whatever had just saved his life was not something he was meant to see. He ran, and his men ran, and they reached the extraction point with 12 minutes to spare. Later, back at the firebase, Merritt filed his report. He included the detail about the 6 shots from the northern ridge. He gave the approximate bearing and distance. The intelligence officer thanked him and told him it was probably another unit operating in the area. Classified, he said, need-to-know basis. Merritt accepted that answer because he had no choice, but he never forgot those 6 seconds. He never forgot them because on quiet nights, when his wife was asleep beside him and his children were breathing softly in the next room, he understood with complete clarity that none of it, the wife, the children, the house, the life, would exist without those 6 shots from a position that the follow-up team found empty. Just a natural depression in the rock, good sight lines, and 6 brass casings that nobody ever claimed. 870 meters away, in a shallow depression behind a cluster of rocks that looked identical to every other cluster of rocks on that facing ridge, a figure lay perfectly still. The Schmidt and Bender scope of the Macmillan TAC 338 was already moving to the next position. Not the compound. The compound fighters were already pulling back. She had assessed that in the first second. Threat neutralized. Exfil window opening. She disassembled the rifle with movements So practiced they required no conscious thought. Each component found its place in the padded case. The case went into the pack. The pack went on her back. She was moving within 45 seconds of the last shot. Her name was Elena Voss. She was 19 years old, and she had just completed her first operational deployment with a classified unit that did not officially exist within any government database, under any organizational chart, in any filing system accessible to anyone, without a very specific set of clearances and a very specific reason to look. She did not feel heroic. She felt the cold of the mountain through her jacket, the familiar ache in her right shoulder from the rifle's recoil, and a quietness in her chest that she had first noticed during training and had learned to recognize as the thing that made her different. Not better, not special, just different. The ability to slow everything down, to reduce a complex situation to its essential geometry, to act without the interference of fear. She descended the back face of the ridge without leaving a trail worth following. The 6 men in that ravine would never know her name. That was the point. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, present day, 2024. The moving boxes were sparse because she had almost nothing to move. Elena Voss stood in the center of a third-floor apartment and looked at what 19 years of service had left her with. A folding table, a military-issue cot she had bought outright because the standard apartment bed felt too soft. 3 boxes of books, military history, tactical theory, and a worn copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War that she had read so many times the spine had cracked in 3 places. A duffel bag of clothing, and a flat black case that she set on the table first, before anything else. She opened the case. The Colt 1911 rested in its foam cutout with the stillness of something that had earned its rest. Custom grips, match-grade barrel, the kind of trigger pull that took a skilled gunsmith 3 hours to get exactly right. On the right grip panel, a small inscription had been cut into the checkering. 8 words, precision, not luck. The mission is the meaning. General Raymond Callaway had given her the pistol on the day she completed Ghost Protocol training. She had been 22 years old. He had said nothing when he handed it to her, just held it out, grip first, and waited for her to take it. She understood later that the silence was the point. He was not giving her a weapon. He was acknowledging what she had become. She set the pistol down and continued unpacking. The books went on the single shelf by the window. Sun Tzu went on the nightstand. The duffel went in the closet. The folding table went in front of the window that faced north. The apartment would remain exactly as functional and exactly as empty as every other apartment she had lived in across 3 continents and 2 decades of service. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the ceiling. She was 38 years old. She had 17 classified combat deployments on a record that barely existed. She had 87 confirmed eliminations in operational theaters spanning Afghanistan, Iraq, northern Syria, and 4 other locations she was still legally prohibited from naming. She had been shot twice. She had been extracted from 2 missions that had gone wrong in ways the after-action reports described in the careful, bloodless language of institutional documentation. The after-action report for Operation Sandstorm, Syria, 2022, described the outcome as a partial success. Elena did not think of it that way. She closed her eyes and saw what she always saw when she closed her eyes in a quiet room. A courtyard in northern Syria. Pre-dawn light. 8 armed fighters, Nasser's men, positioned around a low stone building. The technical efficiency of her approach, the speed of the engagements, her own hands, steady as they always were, working through the angles with the precision that had defined her entire career. And then the door of the building opening and the sound she would carry for the rest of her life. Dr. Samuel Briggs had been a surgeon from Baltimore, working with Doctors Without Borders. He had been taken from a medical clinic in Idlib 3 weeks earlier. The intelligence said he was being held as leverage, a bargaining chip in a network negotiation. The intelligence said she had time. The intelligence was wrong. Nasser had executed Samuel Briggs approximately 4 minutes before Elena reached the building. She had found him face down in the courtyard dust, still wearing the blue surgical scrubs he had been taken in. She had stood over him for exactly 3 seconds. She counted them, because counting things was how she controlled the moments that tried to control her. Then she completed the exfil and said nothing to anyone until the debrief. The debrief report said, primary asset not recovered. Hostile combatants neutralized, 8. Operative wounded, 1. GSW to right lateral torso, through and through. Operative returned to operational status within 11 days. It did not say anything about the 3 seconds she had stood over Samuel Briggs in the pre-dawn light and understood for the first time in her career what it felt like to be too late. She had requested discharge papers 6 weeks after Sandstorm. General Callaway had not tried to talk her out of it. On her 3rd morning in the apartment, she found the brochure. It had been slipped under her door, which she found interesting, not alarming, just interesting. She lived in a building full of current and former military personnel. People slip things under doors here the way civilians send emails. She picked it up off the floor. Iron Shield Combat Training. Real-world techniques for real-world threats. Owner and head instructor, Commander Derek Marsh, USN, retired. SEAL Team 6, DevGru. Multiple combat deployments. 3 blocks away. She looked up the website on her phone. More photographs of Marsh in various configurations of tactical gear. Testimonials from students. A class schedule. A membership rate. Elena set the brochure on the folding table and stood at the window for a while, looking at nothing in particular. She needed to train. 22 years of conditioning did not simply turn itself off. In the past 2 months of civilian life had left her with an excess of physical energy and a deficit of structure that she found genuinely uncomfortable. The therapy sessions that her discharge paperwork technically required were going adequately. The apartment was clean, the books were organized, but her body remembered what it was built for, and it was asking questions she needed to answer somewhere. She put on her gray training clothes and walked to Iron Shield. The converted warehouse had been expensive to renovate. Elena registered that immediately. Polished hardwood floors, climate-controlled air, glass cases along the walls displaying training weapons, edged tools, and what appeared to be a decommissioned M4A1 mounted as decoration. Foats, earth, everywhere. Marsh in desert camouflage. Marsh shaking hands with men in suits. Marsh receiving what appeared to be a commendation from a figure she didn't immediately recognize. The SEAL Trident insignia appeared on 4 separate walls. Elena stood at the back of the room and watched Derek Marsh teach. He was 55, built like a man who had spent 30 years lifting weights and wanted everyone to know it. Silver hair cut in a military fade, the kind of jaw that photographed well. He moved with the physical confidence of someone who had been the most capable person in most rooms for most of his adult life, and his voice filled the space with the comfortable authority of a man who had never been seriously questioned. He was demonstrating a knife disarm sequence on a muscular young man who was clearly a current or former service member. The technique was textbook, clean entry, good wrist control, effective follow-through. Elena watched it twice and cataloged 3 modifications that would make it significantly more reliable against a resisting attacker. She was not being critical, she was being automatic. That was how her mind worked. She noticed the man standing near the east wall before she noticed most of the other students. He was in his mid-40s, lean through the shoulders in the way that distance runners and mountain infantry tend to get lean. His hair was more gray than dark. He stood with his weight distributed evenly and his back never fully to any door or window. He was watching Marsh with a slight expression that Elena recognized immediately because she wore the same one. He was watching Marsh the way you watch something that is technically correct, but missing the thing that makes it real. She filed him away. Marsh spotted her during a pause in the demonstration. He gestured for her to approach with the easy authority of a man who had spent years commanding rooms. She walked forward. 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement. She wore gray sweatpants and a plain black shirt. No logos, no unit patches, nothing that said anything about anything. "New face," Marsh said and smiled. It was a good smile, practiced and warm. "Welcome to Iron Shield. Military background?" "Army," Elena said. "Admin support, 5th Special Forces Group, 15 years. Something shifted in Marsh's expression. Not enough for most people to catch. Elena caught it immediately. The almost imperceptible recalibration of how he was choosing to see her. Administrative support, female, 15 years behind a desk attached to a Special Forces unit. He had decided she was a tourist before she had finished the sentence. "Well," he said, and his voice had acquired a new texture. Not unkind, but shaped by an assumption he had already made and was no longer questioning. "We welcome everyone here. We have a women's self-defense program on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Might be a good place to start." "I'd prefer the regular class," Elena said. "Of course," he smiled again. The same smile, but this time with something underneath it. "Fair warning, we don't go easy on anyone here." Elena took a place at the back of the class. The man from the east wall drifted in her direction during the next drill rotation. He moved the way she moved, which meant he arrived beside her without appearing to have decided to go there. "Cal Merritt," he said quietly enough that only she could hear it. "Elena Voss." "Army admin support," he said, and it wasn't a question. She looked at him. "You hold your weight on the balls of your feet," he said, "and you've been running a threat assessment on this room since you walked in. I counted 3 full sweeps in the first 2 minutes." Elena said nothing. "Rangers," he said, 75th Regiment, 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq. I've been standing in rooms with special operations people for 20 years. You move like someone who's done more than file paperwork." She held his gaze. He held hers. Neither of them looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally. The corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly. "Sure." Marsh called the class to gather at the center of the floor 40 minutes into the session, while Elena was working through a wrist lock sequence with a young woman named Lisa, who had solid instincts and needed minor adjustment to her hip rotation. "Let's talk about the most important principle in real-world combat," Marsh said, his voice rising to fill the room. "Mindset, not technique, not strength. Mindset. The person who controls their mindset controls the fight." Elena continued working with Lisa. "Which is why," Marsh continued, his tone shifting lighter, more performative, building toward a punchline he was confident would land. "I'd like to invite our newest member to give us a demonstration. Miss Voss." Every head in the room turned. Elena straightened slowly. "Don't be shy." Marsh was smiling at her with the full wattage of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how it would go. "You mentioned you worked with Special Forces. Let's see what you picked up." He held out his hand, palm open, at waist height. An invitation, or something that looked like one. "Simple wrist grab," he said, addressing the class as much as her. "I grab her wrist, she shows us her escape. Basic drill, but also a useful reminder that training in a controlled environment and performing under real pressure are 2 very different things. The body responds to stress. The technique you've drilled 100 times has a way of disappearing when someone you don't know puts their hands on you." He looked at her, expectant, generous, patient. The room was very quiet. Cal Merritt had stopped moving. He stood near the east wall with his arms at his sides, watching. Elena walked to the center of the floor. She stopped 2 feet from Marsh and stood naturally. Weight even. Shoulders relaxed. Arms at her sides. To everyone in the room, she looked exactly like what Marsh had decided she was. A desk officer at a combat unit, physically adequate, mentally untested. A person who might know the words to the techniques without knowing the music. Marsh reached for her right wrist. His grip was professional. Firm, 4 fingers over the top, thumb underneath. The kind of controlled grab that a trained person uses to establish dominance without causing immediate injury. He felt her wrist settle into his hand, and he began to turn to the class, already composing the words for the lesson he was about to teach. Her wrist went completely limp. It was the first thing that registered as wrong. He had prepared for resistance, for the instinctive pullback that even trained people exhibit under surprise contact. He had not prepared for complete absence of tension. The unexpected dead weight in his grip lasted less than half a second. Then she moved. Later, if anyone in that room had tried to describe what happened in real time, they would have struggled. It was not dramatic. That was the thing they would not have been able to adequately explain to someone who wasn't there. It was not the movies. There was no leap, no spin, no visible expenditure of force. His feet left the ground with the clean inevitability of physics rather than force, and he landed on his back on the hardwood floor with an impact that drove the air from his lungs. Elena was already there, one knee on his sternum, not with her full weight, but with precisely enough pressure to communicate that the fight was over. Her forearm across his throat, not a choke, a statement. The room had stopped breathing. She looked down at Derek Marsh. His eyes held something she recognized from the faces of other people in other places who had encountered the same moment. The instant when every assumption a person has made about another person, he pushed himself up slowly, jaw tight, face flushed with a complicated mixture of pain and humiliation, and something deeper, the dawning awareness that the narrative he had constructed around this moment had not proceeded according to any plan he had made. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was rough. "That is not standard Army training. That is not in any manual I have ever—" "Commander Marsh." The voice came from the doorway. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the particular quality of a voice that had spent 40 years giving instructions in environments where being understood correctly was the difference between people living and people dying. General Raymond Callaway stood just inside the entrance of Iron Shield combat training. He was 65 years old, silver-haired, lean in the way of career military men who had never stopped moving. He wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, a gray shirt, but they might as well have been a uniform. The bearing was absolute. The room felt it immediately. Marsh turned. His entire posture changed. The defensive anger drained out of him and was replaced, almost involuntarily, by the instinctive deference of a man who recognized authority and responded to it before his brain could decide whether to. "General," he said. "Sir, welcome to Iron Shield." Callaway crossed the floor without hurry. He stopped near Elena and looked at her for a moment with an expression that said many things, none of which he had any intention of explaining to the room. Then he turned to the assembled class. "Permission to see your identification, Ms. Voss." It was phrased as a request. It was not a request. Elena walked to her gym bag by the wall and retrieved a flat, unadorned wallet. From it, she removed a card and held it out to him. He took it. He read it. The room watched his expression, and they understood from that expression that whatever was written on the card was not what any of them had expected. Callaway looked up at the class of 20 students. "What you just witnessed," he said, "is the difference between a sport and a science, between what fighting looks like and what fighting is." He held up the card. "This is a Department of Defense active credentials card. The name on it is Elena Voss. Most people don't know that name. Most people were never meant to." He looked down at the card and read in a clear, measured cadence. "Unit designation, Joint Special Operations Command, Operational Detachment Phantom. Primary specialty, Special Activities Division. Cross-trained with Naval Special Warfare Development Group and 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Combat deployments, 17. Classified." The room was absolutely still. Confirmed eliminations, 87. He lowered the card. He looked at Derek Marsh. You see a woman of average build in plain training clothes. What you don't see is an operator who has spent more time in hostile territory than all of you combined have spent in this building. You made a judgment based on what you saw. The enemies of this country have made the same judgment. He paused. They are not here to discuss how that worked out for them. He turned back to the class. She was asked to demonstrate how to handle a threat. She demonstrated. The fact that Commander Marsh is still breathing is a professional courtesy. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Cal Merritt stood against the east wall with his arms crossed. He was looking at Elena, not at Callaway. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not admiration, not surprise, but something slower and more complicated that she couldn't immediately name. Elena returned the wallet to her bag. Her cover was gone. Whatever Callaway was doing here, and she knew him well enough to know he was doing something specific, it had required her cover to be gone. She did not know the reason yet, but she knew the general, and she knew that he had not walked into this particular room on this particular morning by accident. He caught her eyes across the room. In 20 years, she had learned to read his silences. This one said, "Rooftop, 5 minutes, we need to talk." She picked up her bag and headed for the door. Outside, the October air was cold and clean, carrying the distant sounds of Fort Bragg, helicopter rotors, the flat percussion of a rifle range, the rhythmic cadence of a unit running morning formation somewhere beyond the tree line. She found the roof access through the back stairwell, the way she always found things, quietly, completely, and without leaving a record of having looked. She was already there, standing at the parapet, looking out over the base, when she heard his footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. Of all the training facilities, Callaway said, in all the cities, in all the country, I could say the same to you, General. Raymond, I've been retired for 2 years. No one with your clearance level ever truly retires. He came to stand beside her. For a while, they both looked at the base. There's something you need to know, he said finally. She waited. Khalid Nasser is alive. The October air continued moving. The helicopter rotors continued turning. Somewhere on the rifle range, a controlled burst of automatic fire rolled across the tree line and faded. Elena's right hand moved, almost imperceptibly, to her side, to the place where the scar from his bullet had lived for the past 2 years. She said nothing. Facial recognition, Callaway continued. 3 confirmed sightings on the eastern seaboard in the past month. The most recent was 20 miles from where we're standing. She kept her eyes on the middle distance. He's asking questions in circles where the name means something. He's asking about the ghost. Her hand remained against her side. Marsh, she said, a person of interest, yes. You knew I'd find that brochure. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I'm not back in, she said. I know. I'll keep my eyes open, that's all. That's all I'm asking. They stood on the rooftop for another moment, and the sounds of Fort Bragg moved around them. And Elena understood with the same quiet certainty that had guided her through 17 deployments, that the promise she had just made was one she was very likely going to break. Not because Callaway was asking her to, because Nasser was here, and Samuel Briggs was not. And the distance between those two facts was a debt that no discharge paper and no therapist and no number of quiet mornings with Sun Tzu had yet found a way to close. Fort Bragg, the following morning. The dream always ended the same way. Elena was back in the courtyard in northern Syria, and the pre-dawn light was the color of ash, and she was moving through the angles with the precision that had defined her entire career. 8 targets, 8 engagements, each one clean, each one final, each one reducing the distance between her and the building at the center of the courtyard. And then the door opened, and she was too late. She woke at 0342 with her hand already reaching for the Colt 1911 on the nightstand. Old reflex. She lay still for a moment with her palm flat against the grip, breathing through the transition from that courtyard to this ceiling, from that light to this darkness. Then she got up, made coffee, and opened The Art of War to the page she had marked the morning before. Sun Tzu had written that the skillful fighter puts himself into a position which makes defeat impossible, and does not miss the moment for defeating the enemy. She had read that passage perhaps 300 times over the course of her career. This morning, sitting at the folding table in the thin, early light, with Callaway's words still moving through her mind, it meant something specific. Nasser being alive was not a threat yet. It was information. The threat would come when she stopped treating it as information and started treating it as something personal. She closed the book and began her morning workout. She was 40 minutes into it when her phone showed a message from Merritt. 4 words, "Can we talk? Tonight." She replied, "Iron Shield, 1800. The afternoon class at Iron Shield proceeded with a different atmosphere than the day before. Marsh was present but subdued, moving through his instruction with the careful precision of a man who had recalibrated his understanding of the room he was standing in. He did not single Elena out. He did not make eye contact with her for more than a second at a time. The students who had been there yesterday carried the residue of what they had witnessed, and it changed the texture of the session in ways that were difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. Elena trained and kept her skills at 60%. There was no value in further demonstration. They met on the sidewalk outside Iron Shield at 1800 when the last of the day students had cleared out and the building's lights had gone to half. The October evening was cold enough to see breath. They walked without apparent destination, the way that people who have something serious to say sometimes need the forward motion of walking to get to it. Merritt walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes moving at regular intervals to the street ahead and the street behind. She did the same. 2 professionals on a sidewalk, cataloging the ordinary world around them with a systematic attention that never fully turned off. He was quiet for almost a full block. Then he said, "Kunar Province, October 2005. Elena kept walking. 6 Rangers pinned in a ravine. Taliban fire from the North Ridge and the Eastern Compound. We had ammunition for maybe 4 minutes of sustained contact and no air support. And then 6 Taliban fighters on that North Ridge dropped inside of 10 seconds. Perfect shots. 870 meters, variable crosswind, elevation differential of about 200 feet. The sidewalk continued. A car passed. Somewhere in the distance, a Black Hawk was moving east. We filed a report. Intel officer told us it was another unit in the area. Classified. Need to know. Follow-up team found the position. 6 brass casings. Nothing else." Elena said nothing. "I've been looking at that report off and on for 19 years. His voice had lost the operational flatness it carried in the dojo. There was something underneath it now, something that had weight. I've thought about those 6 shots more times than I can count. I've thought about what my life looks like without them." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "I have a wife," he said. "Carol. We've been married 18 years. 2 boys, 18 and 15. My youngest son just made varsity baseball." He turned and looked at her directly, with the full force of something he had been carrying for a very long time. None of that exists without those 6 shots. The evening moved around them. Traffic, wind, the distant percussion of the bass. Elena looked at the sidewalk. Then she looked up at him. "The brass said it was probably another unit in the area," she said carefully. "That's what the brass said." He held her gaze. "Was it you?" The question sat between them. It was not aggressive. It was not rhetorical. It was the question of a man who had spent 19 years needing an answer and had run out of reasons not to ask it directly. She thought about the 17 layers of classification that covered every operational detail of Ghost Protocol. Then she thought about Carol. 18 years, 2 boys, a 15-year-old making varsity baseball. I was running Overwatch for a classified unit, she said. We had intelligence about Taliban movement against a Ranger element in the area. I was in position. Cal Merritt was quiet for a long time. You saved everything I have, he said finally. I was doing my job. I know you were. He looked away for a moment, jaw tight, composing something. That doesn't change what it is. They stood on the sidewalk in the cold October evening, and Elena felt something she had not expected to feel. Not pride, not satisfaction, something more complicated and less comfortable. The strange weight of being seen by someone who had reason to see you, in a life that had been built specifically to prevent that from happening. I don't need anything from you, Cal said. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I know, and that I'm not going to pretend I don't. He met her eyes again. If you ever need anything at all, I'm here. Elena nodded once, a small, precise movement. She understood what it meant, and she filed it in the category of true things. At 1942 that same evening, the security alert on her phone activated. She was at the folding table reviewing the mental catalog she had been building of Iron Shield's students. Their backgrounds, their connections, the patterns of who spoke to whom and who watched whom when they thought nobody was watching. Nasser would not come directly. He never had. He would place people first. Build a picture. Find the edges of her life before he touched the center of it. The alert was from the motion sensor on the exterior fire escape. Third floor landing. She was moving before the alert finished registering. Colt 1911 from the nightstand, flashlight in her left hand, body to the wall beside the window that faced the fire escape. She stood there for 90 seconds, controlling her breathing, listening. Nothing. No further alerts. No sounds from outside that didn't belong to the ordinary night. She cleared the apartment systematically. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, closet, under the bed. The window leading to the fire escape, locked from the inside. Nothing. She stood in the center of the living room and knew that something was wrong. It took her 11 seconds to identify it. The Art of War was on the shelf. She had left it on the nightstand that morning. She was certain of this the way she was certain of her own heartbeat. The ritual was invariant. Read, replace on nightstand, begin workout. She had performed it over 2,000 times across her career. The book did not end up on the shelf. She crossed to the shelf and took the book down. She opened it. Between pages 44 and 45, there was a photograph. She held it under the lamp. Northern Syria. She recognized the geography immediately. The flat, stony ground, the low mud brick walls, the particular quality of pre-dawn light that made everything look like it was made of the same gray material. In the foreground, face down in the dust, was a figure in blue surgical scrubs. Samuel Briggs. She turned the photograph over. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The letters of someone who had learned English as a second language and had taken pains to become precise with it. The ghost failed once. She will fail again. And below that, a single name. Khalid. She set the photograph on the table and stood over it. She breathed. Nasser had been in this apartment. He had moved her book. He had left his photograph. He had come and gone without triggering a single alarm, except the one sensor on the fire escape, which told her he had used it deliberately, not as his entry point, but as his exit. He wanted her to know he had been here. He wanted her to find the photograph. He wanted her to stand exactly where she was standing now, in her own apartment, with his message in her hands. He was telling her that no space was safe, that her walls were his to breach whenever he chose. She called Callaway. He picked up on the second ring. He was in my apartment, she said. A pause of exactly 2 seconds. Don't touch anything else. I'll have a team there. No team. He didn't leave anything for a team to find. He left one thing, and he left it for me. She looked at the photograph. We need to talk. In person. Safe house, I'll send you the address. I know the address. Another pause. Of course you do, he said. Cal Merritt was at the safe house when she arrived. She understood from his presence that Callaway had made a decision about who was inside this operation, and that she would either accept it or not. She accepted it. The safe house was a single-story ranch home in a subdivision that existed in the space between Fort Bragg and the civilian world. Reinforced door frames, impact-resistant windows, external lighting with no blind spots. A surveillance system that was not the kind sold in hardware stores. Inside, Callaway had converted the main room into something functional. Maps, monitors, a laptop running on a secure network, a printer that would never be connected to anything outside these walls. Elena put the photograph on the table. Callaway looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at her. "He wants you afraid," he said. "I know what he wants. I'm not afraid. I'm focused." She pulled up a chair. "Tell me about Marsh." Callaway moved to the laptop. "Marsh made 3 calls after you left the dojo yesterday. First to his assistant instructor, canceled tomorrow's classes. Second to a burner number, unregistered, untraceable, duration 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Third to a storage facility on Route 24, east side of town. Climate-controlled unit, number 217. He has maintained that unit for 5 years. Annual payment, cash." Elena looked at the address on the screen. "He called the unit itself," Cal said from across the table. "Not the manager, which means there's equipment in there with a live connection." "Which means it's not a storage unit," Elena said. Callaway nodded slowly. "We need to know what's in it." "Tonight," Elena said. Callaway started to say something about tactical teams and proper protocol. Elena looked at him, and he stopped. "The 2 of us, low profile, observe and document." "Cal, I'm in." "I'll be on comms," Callaway said. "Check in every 15 minutes. Miss a check-in, I send a team, regardless." "Fair," Elena said. She did not tell him that she already knew she was not going to just observe. The photograph of Samuel Briggs was on the table, and the part of her that made decisions in the field had already made one. The storage facility on Route 24 was the kind of place designed to attract no attention and succeed completely. Rows of identical orange roll-up doors under sodium vapor lights that turned everything slightly yellow. Cal bypassed the perimeter keypad in under 90 seconds, using an override device that technically did not exist in any civilian market. Unit 217 was in the second building. The keypad lock on the door was more sophisticated than the standard units, which told her something before she even opened it. She bypassed it in 60 seconds. Cal stood watch in the corridor. Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside. She stood very still for a moment, looking at what was in front of her, and recalibrated every assumption she had made about Derek Marsh. The unit was perhaps 12 by 14 feet, but every square foot was used with the focused intentionality of a professional operation. Along the left wall, a fold-out table supported 2 laptops, a satellite communication unit, and a compact printer. Power came from a dedicated battery array in the corner. The room had its own air circulation system, designed to function independently of the building's infrastructure. The right wall was something else entirely. 5 photographs, 5 women, arranged in a horizontal line with the precision of someone who had been looking at them for a long time. Below each photograph, a dossier, documents, printed communications, handwritten notes in a tight, careful script. Surveillance photographs taken with professional equipment. She recognized herself in the leftmost photograph, Fort Bragg, the parking lot of a grocery store she had stopped at twice since arriving. The photograph had been taken 3 weeks ago, before she had signed a lease, before she had unpacked a single box, before anyone outside a very short list of people should have known she was here. She read the names on the other dossiers: Nina Hargrove, Claire Weston, Samantha Wells, Rebecca Hart, Ghost Protocol. All 5 of them, every operational address, Every known daily routine, every civilian cover identity that had taken years to build and had been classified at the highest level the United States government possessed. Her hand found the edge of the table. She breathed. On the laptop nearest to her, the screen was locked, but the power light was active. She did not attempt to access it. What she could see from the open application windows in the taskbar was enough. A communication thread that was still live. And in the corner of the screen, a folder icon labeled with 2 words that stopped everything. Dunlevy, Authority. Arthur Dunlevy. Director Arthur Dunlevy. The man who had conceived Ghost Protocol in the months after September 11th. The man who had argued in classified hearings that the United States needed a different kind of operator for a different kind of war. The man who had personally selected the 20 women who entered the program and personally shaken the hand of the 5 who completed it. The man who had built the cage. She was still looking at the screen when Cal's voice came through the earpiece. Marsh is coming in through the front. 2 minutes, maybe less. She photographed the wall with her phone. She photographed the laptop screen. She photographed every document she could reach in the time she had left. Then she moved to the service door at the back of the unit. She had one hand on the door handle when the lights in the corridor went out. Not a power failure, a switch. Someone had cut the corridor lights from a position that told her they had been in the building longer than Marsh had been walking toward it. Then a voice came from the far end of the corridor, from the direction of the building's rear entrance. Calm, conversational. In English, with the particular flatness of someone who had learned the language from instructors rather than from living inside it. I knew you would come here. The voice belonged to Khalid Nasser. She felt the scar on her right side the way she always felt it in cold spaces. The photograph was an invitation, Nasser continued, still from the darkness, his voice carrying the patience of a man who had been planning this specific moment for a long time. I knew what you would do when you found it. You are a methodical person, Elena. It is one of the things I have always respected about you. Cal's voice in her earpiece. I have eyes on Marsh at the front entrance. He's not alone. There's a second figure. She assessed the corridor geometry in the fraction of a second available to her. Nasser at the far end. Marsh and a second body coming in from the front. She pressed herself against the wall beside Unit 217's door, drew the Colt 1911, and waited for Nasser to come to her. In a 12-foot wide corridor, at the range he would have to close to reach her, his training would not be enough to overcome the fundamental geometry. She heard him moving, soft footsteps, professional. But she had spent 20 years learning the sounds of corridors in darkness. He came around the corner and she fired. The shot caught him in the left shoulder, high. The angle was wrong and she had accounted for it. The impact spun him into the wall. She was already moving, closing the distance. And what happened in the next 6 seconds was less a fight than a series of biomechanical decisions made faster than conscious thought could track. She had him controlled and face down on the floor when Cal came through the service door behind her, and from the front of the building came the sound of Marsh shouting, pain, not aggression. Cal had taken Marsh. She pressed her forearm between Nasser's shoulder blades and reached for her cuffs. Nasser's face was turned sideways on the floor. One eye found hers in the dim light from the unit's open door. His breathing was controlled despite the wound. A professional, even in defeat. He almost smiled. You think this is over, he said. I think you're in a significant amount of pain, Elena said. Pain is temporary. A pause. You should ask your general about Director Dunlevy before you trust anything he tells you. Before you trust anyone. She secured his wrists. Ask him, Nasser said, how much $5 million is worth. Callaway was in the safe house when they brought them in. He looked at Nasser with the expression of a man seeing something he had prepared himself to see, but found difficult anyway. They put Marsh in the basement's second room. Elena came into Nasser's room alone, pulled a chair to the center of the floor, and sat down. Nasser sat against the wall with his wound dressed and his wrists secured. He was composed in the way of men who have decided that what happens next is no longer their primary concern. "You came to the United States to find me," she said. "I came to finish what began in Syria," he said simply. "Sandstorm. You took something from me in that courtyard, more than blood." He turned his face slightly so the overhead light caught the scar that ran from below his left eye to the line of his jaw. Her bullet, the one that had grazed him in the chaos of the exfil. In certain systems of understanding, a wound like this carries a specific weight, a specific obligation. "You killed an innocent man," Elena said. "A complication," he said. "A timing problem, nothing more." She looked at him without expression. Dr. Samuel Briggs had a daughter. She was 9 years old when he was taken. She's 11 now. She asked her mother last month why her father's name isn't in the newspaper with the other people who died doing good things overseas. Nasser was quiet. "You came here for me," Elena said. "You used Marsh. You used the photograph. You have been systematically building intelligence on 5 women whose names should not exist in any file you have ever touched." She leaned forward slightly. "Who gave you those names?" "Ask your general about Dunlevy," he said. "Ask him what $5 million purchases. Ask him whether the man who built your program valued it as much as he valued his retirement." The room was very still. "Director Dunlevy sold your names," Nasser said. "All 5. Every address, every cover identity, every safe house in every city, every woman in your program. He sold everything. 2 years ago, 60 days before you left Syria." Elena sat with that for a moment. 60 days before Sandstorm, which meant the intelligence that told her she had time to reach Samuel Briggs had come through channels that Dunlevy oversaw, which meant the intelligence that made her 4 minutes too late had not been a failure of collection. It had been deliberate. She stood up. "My people," she said. "The other 4. What's in motion against them?" "Amsterdam, Tokyo, Cape Town, Sydney." He looked at her steadily. "Teams are already positioned. 2 weeks. They were waiting for confirmation that you were contained." She was already moving to the door. "You can't reach all of them in time," Nasser said behind her. "You are one person." She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. "You keep saying that," she said without turning around. "The enemies of this country keep making the same mistake." She walked out. In the main room, Callaway was at the monitors. He looked up and read her face. "Dunlevy," she said. The word landed like a stone in still water. She watched the sequence move across his face. First the incomprehension, then the recalibration, then the settling of something that looked like a man who had been carrying a question for 2 years and had just received the answer he had hoped he would never get. "How sure are you?" "Nasser has no reason to lie about this. He wants me afraid and isolated. Telling me the man who built my program sold it doesn't achieve either of those things. He told me because he wants me to understand the full geometry of what happened in Syria. He wants that to be the last thing I carry." Cal came in from the basement stairwell and stopped, reading the room. Callaway sat down heavily. For a moment he looked all of his 65 years. "Amsterdam, Tokyo, Cape Town, Sydney. Teams in position 2 weeks. Waiting for confirmation I was contained." She looked at the monitors. "We need to move on all 4 simultaneously. Right now." Callaway was already reaching for the secure phone. "One more thing," Elena said. He looked at her. "Rebecca Hart in Sydney. If Nasser's people are waiting for a signal that may have already gone out when we picked him up." "I'll start with Sydney," Callaway said. He dialed. The room was quiet except for the sound of the connection traveling through channels that officially did not exist. Looking for a woman in Sydney whose name had been sold to a man who understood exactly what it was worth. Elena stood at the window. Outside, Fort Bragg continued its perpetual motion. The wall that had been built to protect her and her sisters had always had a door in it. They had simply not known where the door was, or who had the key. Now she knew. She picked up her phone and pulled up the Ghost Protocol emergency channel, a frequency that had not been used since the program was suspended 2 years ago. A channel that 5 women had memorized and had hoped they would never need. She keyed the transmitter. "This is Voss. Authentication Phantom 7. All stations, this is not a drill. Acknowledge." Static. Then one by one, 4 acknowledgements came back. Amsterdam, Tokyo, Cape Town. And then, after a pause that lasted long enough to mean something, a voice from Sydney that was tight with controlled effort, but present, alive. Rebecca Hart. "Voss, I have 2 hostiles in the building." A beat. "I was wondering when you were going to call." Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them and began to plan. The safe house had a particular silence at 0200. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of people doing precise work under pressure, the kind of quiet that forms around focused minds the way water forms around stone. Callaway worked 3 phone lines simultaneously through channels that would leave no record. Merritt sat at the secondary table with Nasser's laptop, working through the file architecture with the methodical patience of a man who understood that what was on the drive mattered more than how quickly he found it. Elena stood at the window. She was doing what she always did in the minutes before a situation moved from planning to execution. She was stripping away everything that was not essential until what remained was distances, angles, and the weight of what was known against the weight of what was not. Rebecca Hart was on the 3rd floor of a residential building in Glebe, Sydney. 2 hostiles confirmed inside, 1 on the ground floor, 1 on the 2nd. Rebecca had eyes on both through the building's interior camera system, access through a tablet she kept in her apartment, the way Elena kept the Colt 1911 on her nightstand. The hostiles were not moving. They were waiting for Nasser's signal, which Nasser had not been able to send. "How long before they move on their own initiative?" Cal asked without looking up from the laptop. Nasser ran a tight network. They will wait for the signal, or they will wait for a check-in that doesn't come. After 2 missed check-ins, they act independently. She looked at the clock on the wall. "We have approximately 3 hours. Sydney is 16 hours ahead." Callaway looked at her over the monitor. The question in his expression was one he had not yet asked aloud, but had been forming since she walked back from Nasser's holding room. She answered it before he asked. "I'm going," she said. "Elena." "Callaway." She said his name the way she said it when the conversation had already ended. "Rebecca has 2 hostiles in a civilian residential building. She has no weapons beyond what she carries on her person. She has no backup because her backup was compromised when Dunlevy sold the program." She turned from the window. "I'm going." Cal closed the laptop. "I'm going with you." She studied him. 45 years old, a body that had been through 2 combat tours and had maintained itself with the discipline of a man who understood that the work was not finished. Eyes that were calm and ready in equal measure. "You follow my lead," she said. "No independent action without communication." "Understood." She looked at Callaway. "Amsterdam, Tokyo, Cape Town. I need all 3 contained before we land. I'll have confirmation within the hour. Elena," he paused, "what Nasser told you about Dunlevy. Before you walk out of here." "After Sydney," she said. He nodded. He understood the arithmetic. She picked up her bag, checked the Colt 1911, and walked to the door. The first flight out of Raleigh-Durham to Los Angeles left at 05:45. The connection to Sydney departed at 8:30. Elena bought both tickets with cash at the counter, using a cover identity that technically no longer existed, but whose documentation remained valid because she had maintained it with the same systematic care she applied to everything. Cal sat beside her in economy and did not ask questions. They flew west into a dawn that stretched across the continental United States, like something being slowly revealed. Elena slept in 90-minute intervals. She reviewed what she knew. She revised her model of the situation each time new information arrived through the encrypted channel on her phone. Amsterdam confirmed secure at 0312 Eastern. Nina Hargrove had been moved to a classified safe location by a team Callaway reached through a back channel that bypassed Dunlevy's oversight entirely. Tokyo confirmed secure at 0347. Claire Weston had been extracted from her apartment building 20 minutes before two men arrived at her door, claiming to be building maintenance. Cape Town confirmed secure at 0521. Samantha Wells had been reached by satellite phone and was already moving under her own initiative. She had not waited to be told. She had understood from Elena's emergency transmission what the situation required and had acted immediately. Elena noted this with quiet satisfaction. Ghost Protocol had selected well, whatever else it had failed at. Sydney remained an open question. Rebecca Hart's last transmission had been 4 words. Still here, still watching. The tone had been exactly what Elena would have expected. Controlled, present, without excess. The hostiles were now 8 hours past their last expected check-in with Nasser. They were operating on independent initiative. The question was how they would exercise it. Los Angeles to Sydney was 14 hours and 20 minutes. Elena spent the final 2 hours of the flight in the particular state of focused stillness that preceded every operational engagement of her career. Not sleep, not wakefulness, something between them that she had possessed naturally since she was 19 years old in the mountains of Kunar province. She reduced the problem to its essentials. A residential building in Glebe, interior stairs, exterior fire escape, ground floor entry points. 2 hostiles trained to a professional standard, but sent on the assumption that the element of surprise and 2-to-1 numbers would be sufficient. They had been sent, in other words, on the same assumption that Derek Marsh had made when he reached for a desk clerk's wrist in a training dojo. Elena had spent 20 years correcting that assumption. Sydney arrived in the late afternoon gold of an October Southern Hemisphere spring. They cleared customs without comment, rented a car in a name that existed in 3 government databases and none of them, and drove into Glebe through residential streets lined with terraced houses and fig trees. Cal drove. Elena watched the neighborhood. Glebe was old Sydney, compact and human-scaled. Rebecca's building was on a side street with moderate foot traffic during the day and light traffic after dark. 3 stories, red brick, external fire escape on the north face. Elena had the building's layout memorized from the floor plan Callaway had transmitted 6 hours earlier. They parked 2 blocks east. Ground floor hostile is the priority, Elena said. He controls the exit. You want me on the exterior, Cal said. North side, fire escape access. If either of them tries to exit through the building's rear, you contain it. You are not coming inside. He read her face. He accepted it. Check in every 2 minutes, she said. She was out of the car before he could respond. The building's front entrance was a security door with a keypad. She bypassed it in 40 seconds. The ground floor hallway smelled of cooking and detergent and the particular dusty warmth of old buildings in mild climates. She stood inside the entrance and listened. The hostel on the ground floor was in the stairwell alcove to her left. She could not see him, but she could hear the specific quality of stillness that a person in a confined space produces when they are trying not to be heard. There is a difference between an empty space being quiet and a person being quiet inside a space. 20 years had made that difference as legible to her as large print. She moved left, keeping to the right wall, placing each step with the foot-first rolling technique she had developed independently at 19 before anyone had given it a name. He was there, 40 years old approximately, compact and well-conditioned. His back was to the stairwell wall, his attention on the building's front entrance. He had not heard her. What followed was not prolonged. It never was when the geometry was correct. He was trained. She was something else. The difference was identical to the difference between the techniques Derek Marsh had displayed in his dojo and the techniques she had used to put him on the floor. One built for demonstration, one built for outcomes. She controlled him to the floor, secured his wrists with the zip ties from her jacket pocket, and checked his airway. Conscious, unhurt. She keyed her earpiece. Ground floor clear. Cal's voice. Copy, north side quiet. Second floor, stay on the exterior. The second hostel was more cautious. He had heard something. The particular pressure change in a building's ambiance when a new element has entered it. He was inside an apartment on the second floor whose door he had bypassed, using it as an observation point with a line of sight to the stairwell. Rebecca Hart's voice came through the encrypted channel with the same controlled precision it had carried for 16 hours. Second hostel is in 2B, left of the door. He's been there for 20 minutes. He's listening. Elena stopped on the second floor landing and considered the door of apartment 2B. He was within 10 feet of the doorframe. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Then she knocked. Not a police knock, a neighborly knock. The kind that belonged to this building, to this street, to an ordinary Tuesday evening in Glebe. The kind of knock that a person does not prepare to receive from an operative who has just neutralized their partner on the ground floor. He opened the door, not fully, the 4 inches that a security chain allows. Enough for him to look out and see a woman standing in the hallway with nothing in her hands and nothing on her face except ordinary expectation. The 4 inches was enough. He was on the floor of the entry with his wrists secured before the door had finished moving. She checked his airway, secured his weapon separately. She keyed the channel. Third floor. I'm coming up. Rebecca Hart opened the door of apartment 3C before Elena had raised her hand to knock. She was 36 years old, dark hair cut practically short, the build of someone who had completed the same 18 months of training Elena had completed and had maintained every ounce of what that training had built. She stood with her weight forward and her eyes clear, looking at Elena with the expression of someone who had spent 16 hours in a contained and pressurized situation and had managed it without fracture. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," Elena said. Rebecca looked past her at the empty hallway, then stood back from the door and let her in. The apartment was small and precise and told a story Elena recognized because it was the same story her own apartment told. Functional furniture, no excess, books on a single shelf, and on the kitchen table, a tablet displaying the building's security camera feeds, which Rebecca had been monitoring for 16 unbroken hours. "Both hostels secured," Elena said. "Cal Merritt is on the exterior. He's good people." Rebecca nodded. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the tablet for a moment. Then she looked up. "Dunlevy," she said. "Yes. How long have you known?" "Since last night." Rebecca turned the tablet face down on the table with a precise, controlled movement. "I trusted that program. I trusted everything about it. I gave it everything." "I know," Elena said. "He knew what we gave." "Yes." The words sat in the small apartment with the full weight of what it contained. Arthur Dunlevy had known exactly what the 5 women of Ghost Protocol had sacrificed. He had designed those sacrifices. And then he had sold their names in faces in safe houses to a man who had used the information to hunt them. $5 million, 20 years of service. The arithmetic was an obscenity. "What happens to him?" Rebecca asked. "Callaway has everything. The evidence from Nasser's laptop, the communication records from Marsh's storage unit, the financial trail. Dunlevy is in McLean and doesn't know we have any of it yet. He thinks his network is still operational. He's going to find out otherwise very shortly." "He is." Rebecca looked at her. Was this purely personal, or was there something larger? Elena thought about what Nasser had said. He was using Dunlevy's intelligence to map every covert operation Ghost Protocol had touched, every asset we had protected, every network we had penetrated, every piece of intelligence we had generated over 18 years. He was building a comprehensive picture of American covert capability in the Middle East. Rebecca understood immediately. A blind spot. A manufactured one. If you know exactly what your enemy can see, you know exactly where to hide. Into which his organization would step, Rebecca said, more sophisticated, better positioned, with 18 years of our operational history as their foundation. Yes, the two women sat with the full geometry of it, not just an act of revenge, an act of strategic architecture. Nasser had used his personal grievance as the engine of something much larger, and Dunlevy's greed had handed him the fuel. There's something else, Elena said. The USB drive Marsh left us. It has enough to dismantle the network. 17 cells in 12 countries. She paused. Marsh gave us that. In the end. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. A support role. Administrative discharge. And then 20 years of building a mythology around himself. And somewhere in the middle of that mythology, a real terrorist found him and told him exactly what he wanted to hear. That he mattered, Elena said. That he was the person he'd always claimed to be. Is that what Nasser tried with you? In Syria? He tried something else with me. Elena stood and went to the window. Sydney spread out below in the evening gold. Harbor water visible between the rooftops. He wanted me afraid and isolated. He wanted me to feel like there was no safe space. No ground that wasn't already his. Did it work? For about 11 seconds. The corner of Rebecca's mouth moved. And then, she asked, and then I called all of you. They were still at the table when Elena's secure phone buzzed. A single message from Callaway, 3 words. He's in custody. Arthur Dunlevy had been arrested at his home in McLean, Virginia at 06:30 Eastern Time, 41 hours after Elena had found the photograph of Samuel Briggs in her copy of The Art of War. He had come to the door in a bathrobe and looked at the 2 federal agents on his doorstep with the expression of a man who had been waiting for something without knowing it. The charges ran to 4 pages. Treason, espionage, conspiracy to commit murder of federal agents and intelligence officers, wire fraud, misappropriation of classified materials. He had not said anything. The arresting agent reported later that Dunlevy had looked less like a man being arrested and more like a man who had simply run out of time on something that had been running down for a long while. Elena set the phone on the table. It's done, she said. Rebecca looked at her for a moment. For what it's worth, what you did, coming here, not because you were ordered to, because you chose to. She paused. It matters. You matter. Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen, slightly and without fanfare. Come on, she said. We have a flight to catch. 1 week later, Langley, Virginia. The memorial wall at CIA headquarters existed in a building that most people who worked in that building had never visited. It was not on the standard tour. It was not on any map available to the public. It was accessed through a corridor on a floor whose existence was acknowledged only in documents that required a specific clearance level to read. The wall was black granite, smooth. Stars carved into it in rows, each star representing an officer who had died in service to the United States intelligence community. No names, no dates, no details. Only stars. Elena stood in front of it at 06:10 on a Tuesday morning, alone. She had driven to Virginia the night before and slept in the car in a parking structure 3 blocks from the facility and walked in through an entrance that required 3 separate authentications. The new star was in the 3rd row from the bottom, 6th from the left. It was indistinguishable from every other star on the wall. She stood in front of it for a long time. She thought about a courtyard in northern Syria, and a man in blue surgical scrubs, and 3 seconds of standing still, while everything that should have been otherwise settled into the permanence of what actually was. She thought about the 11-year-old girl who had asked her mother why her father's name wasn't in the newspaper. She thought about the fact that this star would never be in any newspaper, that the girl would never stand here, that the acknowledgement Samuel Briggs deserved would live only in this room, on this wall, in the form of a carved granite point that looked exactly like all the others. She thought about whether that was enough. She decided that enough was not the right measure. The right measure was whether it was true, whether the record, however classified and however invisible to the world, accurately reflected what the man had been. A doctor who had gone to a difficult place to do difficult work because he believed the people there deserved the same care as the people anywhere. The star was true. She put her hand flat against the granite for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked out. But before she could reach the corridor, she heard footsteps behind her. Callaway. He had come alone, without announcement, the way he did everything that mattered. He stood beside her and looked at the wall for a moment without speaking. "The USB drive Marsh left," Callaway said finally. "All 17 cells are confirmed dismantled as of this morning. The last one was in Frankfurt. Nasser's network is gone." Elena said nothing. "There's also this," he said. He reached into his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper, a formal notification bearing a seal she recognized, and a signature below it that carried the weight of 30 years of intelligence operations. She read it. Derek Marsh, formerly Derek Allen Marsh, USN support personnel, administratively discharged 1998, had been posthumously entered into the classified record as a cooperating civilian source whose final act had materially contributed to the disruption of a significant domestic terrorism network. The language was careful and governmental and entirely bloodless, the way all official language was. But at the bottom of the page, in a section marked "Additional Notation," someone had written 4 words that had not been written by a lawyer or a bureaucrat. He did the right thing. Elena folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. "One more thing," Callaway said. She looked at him. "The Oversight Committee met yesterday. There was a discussion about what comes next, about the gap that exists between what Ghost Protocol was and what the country still needs." He reached into his jacket again and produced a folder. He held it out to her with both hands, a formality she had never seen from him before. "They asked me to bring you this." She took it. The folder was thin, 3 pages. The outer cover bore a classification stamp at the highest level she had ever seen applied to a document, and below the stamp, 2 words, Phoenix Protocol. She opened it. The language was careful and precise in the way of documents that have been reviewed by many people in many rooms. She read it slowly. An operational unit, 5 members, formally acknowledged within the intelligence community at the highest classification level. The authority to decline missions assessed as carrying unacceptable civilian risk. Reporting to a civilian oversight committee with representatives from state, defense, and the intelligence community. No single agency with unilateral command authority. And at the bottom of the second page, a paragraph she read twice. The operational record of the predecessor program, designation Ghost Protocol, is hereby formally acknowledged within the classified archive of the Special Activities Division. The contributions of its 5 members, their deployments, their missions, their sacrifices, are documented in perpetuity. Future generations of intelligence officers will study their methods. She turned to the 3rd page. Her photograph, her name, and below that a title she had never held and had not expected to hold. Director, Phoenix Protocol. She looked up at Callaway. "The Oversight Committee approved unanimously," he said. "The director of the CIA signed this morning." A pause. "The director who is not Arthur Dunlevy." She looked back at the photograph of herself, 38 years old, brown hair, the faint lines around the eyes that came from years of squinting through scopes in harsh light. The set of the mouth that people who did not know her read as severity and people who knew her read as precision. She thought about a 19-year-old girl in the mountains of Kunar province who had fired 6 shots and walked away without leaving a name. "There's one more thing," Callaway said. He reached into his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper, a mission notification, formatted in the standard template she had read hundreds of times. Location, Berlin. Situation, embassy personnel, hostage scenario. Window, 72 hours. Authorization level, Phoenix Protocol. She looked at the bottom of the page, 4 names: Nina Hargrove, Claire Weston, Samantha Wells, Rebecca Hart. Beside each name, a single green indicator. She took out her phone, opened the Phoenix Protocol secure channel. 4 green indicators on the screen, matching the 4 on the page. She looked at Callaway. "They've been waiting for you to call them," he said. "They've been ready since Sydney." She set the mission notification on the equipment mat and placed her phone beside it. She picked up The Art of War from the corner where she had set it before the class that morning and turned to the passage she had read at 0342 in her apartment before any of this had begun. The skillful fighter puts himself into a position which makes defeat impossible and does not miss the moment for defeating the enemy. She had read that sentence perhaps 400 times. It had meant different things in different rooms. In this room, standing in front of a wall of anonymous stars, it meant something she had not expected it to mean when she first encountered it at 22 years old in a training facility in Virginia. It meant that the position you built for yourself was not only tactical, that the ground you occupied was not only physical, that the most durable position was the one that existed in the people around you, in the work you passed forward, in the 4 green indicators on a secure channel that 4 women had answered without hesitation when she sent the signal. She put the book in her bag. She walked out of the building and into the October morning. She took out her phone. She keyed the channel. "This is Voss, Authentication Phoenix 1. She paused. "All stations, acknowledge." 4 responses came back, immediate, without question, without the half-second of hesitation that uncertainty produces. Amsterdam, Tokyo, Cape Town, Sydney. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, the way she had done since Kunar Province in 2005, when she had learned that the moment between deciding and acting was the moment that everything reduced itself to what was real. Then she opened them. "Berlin," she said. 72 hours. Let's go to work." She walked to her car and the October air moved around her, and the sounds of the ordinary world proceeded in their ordinary way. Somewhere in that world, 6 men were going about their Tuesday morning, a wife named Carol, 2 boys, a 15-year-old with a baseball to throw, and none of them would ever know why. She had spent 20 years as a ghost in that world, invisible by design, effective by necessity, alone by requirement. That was not what she was now. She was something the program had never planned for, and the enemies of her country had never prepared for, and the institution that had built her had not fully understood it was building when it handed a 19-year-old girl a rifle and a position on a ridge in Kunar Province and asked her to hold the line. She was a ghost who had found her people, and they were already moving.